So a lot of questions about the cops in jail. I had a lot of questions. People asked me about, the roles of the cops, how I got along with the cops, how people get along with the cops. The craziest thing is the first time that I was ever had an interaction with an officer in prison, he asked me, I remember I just got there and he asked me, hey, can you help me with these boxes of toilet paper? And I was like, I ain't helping you. It ain't my job. You know what I mean? So I was real slick with him. He sent me to the lieutenant's office. And lieutenant's like, hey, if an officer asks you to do something, just do it. I'm like, but it ain't my job. I'm going to be working in the kitchen. I had just got to Leavenworth Penitentiary. And I was like, I was a fresh kid still, I mean, that had, come full circle into, having a good rapport with a lot of the cops in jail. You know what I'm saying? Because if you had a good rapport with them, they were just, some of them were decent fellows. They would just kind of let you do, what you wanted to do. You just kind of had to, just move in a certain way, right? Obviously, the cops that knew me from like, just prison record and, before I even had an established prison record, just record in my case. So they were always pretty cool. Man, hey, what's up? Hey, what's up? So, by the end of my bid, I had been in institutions with officers, that had started as a rookie. I seen them come in and some of them make warden, and they always remember you. They're like, hey, what's up? Or like wardens will tell me, hey, the warden from the other institution said you knew him when he was a lieutenant. He asked for you, called over here. We were talking about something. He said how you were doing, because that's how it is. You build a rapport with these people over the years. And that's going to bring us to, today's video is like the roles that these officers work in. So you have, first off, there's custody cops. Those are the cops that, corrections officers, I call them cops, but they're custody officers. They work the block. They're just exactly what it's called, custody. So they'll be like your 8 to 4 officer. They'll be like a 4 to 12 officer, and then, a 12 to 7 officer. And they work like 8-hour shifts, 3 shifts. And they're just the cops that work in the block. And like if anything happens, they call, more cops if there's a disturbance, whatever the case may be is. So there's custody cops. Then there's like people that are like specialized, like some officers. You have to be an officer first to walk in the door. No matter what, you know how to, you are trained, whether you're a doctor, a nurse, a PA, a dentist, a chaplain. Everybody is trained in like, crowd control. If something happens, if there's, a disturbance in a prison, everybody has that base level training. And, you'll see chaplains sometimes with handcuffs. You'll see, people that are trained in a million different things in prison. But the custody cops, then you'll have like the step above the custody cops is like, say for instance, like senior officers. There'll be like people that have 10 years or more and they're senior officers. Other officers stepped up and they become like, we call them the brass, like lieutenants. So lieutenants are the ones that, walk around check every block. An officer just works one block. If there's like 12 blocks in an institution, the lieutenant, depending on what lieutenant it is, right? It could be activities lieutenant, operations lieutenant. So the activities lieutenant is the one that, will make sure everything's going all right in the institution, make sure the moves are on time. If something happens, to make sure there's not a move, if there's a disturbance, and a move is 10 minutes to get everybody from one place to the next. So at like 10 minutes to 7, there's the 7 o'clock move. And from 10 minutes, you move, and they'll say, 10-minute move. Then people will go to and from the law library to the units, and then those custody officers will be outside, like just looking around. 99% of the time, it's no problem, right? They're just outside. Maybe they're having a cigarette themselves, or, whatever they're doing. I mean, they gave them a lot of flack for it, but a lot of the officers smoked after the smoking was taken away from the inmates. Some inmates got a little crazy about that, right? Because they were hooked on them cigarettes. But so you'll see all the cops come out during the 10-minute move. The lieutenant will come by. He'll sign a book in every block. Like, he'll come in, just make sure everything's all right. Like when I talked about tattooing, like the unit officer would be cool with you doing a tattoo, but he'd tell, hey, have a lookout. If the lieutenant comes in, stop and, go do something else, because the lieutenant was like his boss, the overseer. And then after the lieutenant, like there was also activities, there was also operations lieutenant. And the operations lieutenant was almost like kind of a step above the activities lieutenant. And he was the one that ran the whole show, when, like at night, say, because in the daytime, of course, the warden runs the show, right? He's the chief executive officer of the institution. But let's take a minute here to go above the lieutenant. So lieutenant is like the one that's in charge over the custody officers, in charge of the institution. So then the captain, right? But the captain's only there. So after lieutenant, like the captain very seldom would ever work after 4 o'clock. By the time the 4 o'clock count ends, the captain's gone. Everybody else is gone. The only people that are there that run the show is a lieutenant and somebody called a duty officer. A duty officer was a unit manager and above in rank. And what they used to do is they used to oversee the institution, just another overseer. I don't know if he was above a lieutenant or not, but the duty officer it was a rotation. And everybody had to have it once a week. Like there would be a unit manager, was it case managers? Yeah, case managers can do it. Unit managers could do it. People in administration could do it, like somebody that ran the business office, administrative positions like that. And that was really like the lieutenant would run the place, but a duty officer was one that would just go week to week. So he wasn't in a permanent position. And they used to change positions because they figured it would be like more democratic, right? You needed somebody to oversee the overseers, in other words. And the duty officer, it would be a certain officer, different every week, till you went through the whole administration, and then you would start the rotation over again. And that's almost like not really in the chain of command. Of course, it's in the chain of command, but it's not. It's fluid. It's very fluid because it's a different person every week. Like the activities lieutenant for the quarter would be the same activities lieutenant for the quarter on that shift the whole time. Then sometimes they change shift, go to the morning shift. So, there was the morning shift, then the afternoon shift, and then the overnight shift. It would be morning, evening, and overnight. But above the lieutenant was a captain, right? And like I said, the captain was never there after 4 o'clock. Very seldom, of course, if he was. So he was like he's the whole head of security in an institution. If there's a breach in security, the captain of the institution is the one that bears the brunt of it. But the captain is the one that makes sure that the institution is secure, to make sure that, nobody can breach the security. He works in concert with SIS. It's another branch of officers, and they are the security officers. They are the prison's investigators. So every prison has like a little FBI, and really, they are the investigators. They are the FBI of the prison, honest to God. They investigate everything from escapes, drug introduction, people trying to introduce drugs or bring drugs into the institution through visits. They investigate the cops that they think are bringing drugs in. They do the work. The SIS are the investigators. I think it means Special Investigative Services. I'm not really too sure. In the state system, which I've never been in, I don't have any experience in the state system, only what I'm told, the investigators are called IPS, the IPS, which means the Inner Perimeter Security. I'm told. Of course, all my experience is in the federal system. But anyway, not their boss, right? Because their bosses will be like the SIS lieutenant, and they're the ones they answer to, and he answers to the captain. But the person they work in concert with is called the SIA, which is the Special Investigative Agent. And what he does is he is the liaison to the FBI. And they work in concert with the federal authorities, FBI, ATF, DEA. When I showed you one of those, I had a ticket I had that went to the FBI for getting into a fight in the chow hall, was assaulting another person. They were going to make it a crime, a hate crime, or whatever the case may be. They were in cahoots. The SIA had Special Investigative Agent had to sign my paper to say that the FBI wasn't going to pick up the charge. And that was the reason why they delayed my institutional hearing. So those are the prison investigators. And whatever the investigators investigate on the outside, they also investigate on the inside. Think about, in other words, when, for instance, on September 11th, right? Of course, the prison investigators investigated everybody they thought might have had ties to those outside terrorists. They investigated them. And some people got locked up, in other institutions like Terre Haute, where they had a terrorist block because they said they were friendly, they were in cahoots. Who knows what the actual story was, but I know that people did get investigated and people did get further, locked up. Their environment got smaller and smaller and smaller and more secure and more secure and more secure. Well, you couldn't send out letters. You had to have permission to make a phone call. There was just it's a really, really restrictive environment in Terre Haute where they called it the terrorist block. So those agencies worked in cahoots with the investigators in the prison. And the investigators gather intelligence in the prison just like they do on the street. So there's a whole microcosm on the inside that's exactly like the outside, especially with law enforcement. And, the United States attorneys actually call the investigators in the prison sometimes, and they'll be like, for instance, my friend Vito Guzzo, that was Joey O'Kane's co-defendant. I know both of them very well. I know Vito just got out, and congratulations to him. But it's phenomenal dude. I love Vito. I loved Joey. I was closer to Joey because we spent more time together. But what they did in their case was the prosecutor called. Joey and Vito were together. Remember when Vito got on the compound? I remember I used to give everybody, because I had a place where I used to get another institution. I brought some toothbrushes, because sometimes you get these little rinky-dink toothbrushes in jail. They're horrible. I had these big Oral-B toothbrushes, and anybody that I liked, all my friends said, this is a good guy. I used to give him an Oral-B toothbrush, give him some books of stamps to get him going on the compound, But I gave him an Oral-B, and I remember when Vito got there, and, Joey was like, listen, my co-defendant, he's a great guy, And I love Vito, and I love Joey too, God rest Joey's soul. But the prosecutor called the investigators at the prison and said, hey, these two can't be together. What are they doing together? Separate them. So they made their life difficult. And what they did was they locked Vito up. And I'm not sure, but I believe because Joey went and got his hip done in Missouri, that they let Vito back out on the compound. And I'm not sure. I think Vito ended up getting transferred for sure. I know Vito got transferred because he wasn't there. He wasn't on the compound when I left. And it was no other reason that the prosecutors in their case called the investigators at the prison and said, separate these two. That's all it takes. They can't be together, And for what reason, right? I mean, they're in prison with, guards hovering over them, and they still had to be separated. But just some of the things that, we've all been through stuff, right? But, you can't diminish or curtail the stuff that Vito and Joey went through. Obviously, Joey was doing a bunch of life sentences. Vito got sentenced to more time than me, I believe. I think he got like 37, 38, maybe 40 years. But phenomenal dude. He's on the street. I love you, Vito. Listen, best of luck to you. And I was just real happy to hear you got out. But so everything that goes on the street goes on in prison as well, And, there's other people like administrators, right? There's people that work in the business office, right? So they're people that very seldom come in contact with inmates. But like I said, they have the training. So the whole institution is staffed by a lot of people that are foremen in the kitchen, but they're trained in custody as well. They all start off getting trained in custody because they all have to be cops when the shit goes down, you know. And you meet a lot of good people and a lot of bad people on the way. So I don't want to miss anything. But so then in the next chain of command after the captain, that's all security. Then we start coming into the associate wardens. So there's like 3 or 4, there's maybe 4 associate wardens. Like some of them have operations, the associate warden over operations, associate warden over custody, associate warden over activities. And then, you know, they're the bigwigs. They're the suits and ties. We call them the suits. So the suits are at the institution from 9 a.m., 8 a.m., maybe 7 a.m. It depends, really. You know what I'm saying? They're there in the morning until like 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. After the 4 o'clock count, there's no more suits there. The brass is still there because the suits are the people, like the wardens, and the brasses are like the lieutenants. So, you know, that's just the names we use for them. But the AWs, and after the AW, of course, is the warden. The warden is the chief executive officer of the institution. He is the boss. And I met a lot of good wardens in my day. I never really, you know, I mean, I had good rapports with all of these people, man. I'm not the guy that's going to sit here and tell you, oh, these people are out for me. They were going to, sometimes I got, you know, sometimes I got hemmed up, you know what I mean? And it's just the way it is. It's jail. If you can't take getting hemmed up in jail, if you can't take getting locked up under an investigation, that's going to end up happening to you. It's when you do a 35-year sentence, when you do a 10-year sentence, at some point you're getting locked up for an investigation, you know? And it's just the way it was. And did I have some negative run-ins with officers? Yeah, definitely. You know, but like I said before, I just had a short memory. Like, whatever, it's just a bad day, right? You know, you beef with somebody, you have whatever. I'm saying it's not, you didn't come to blows, you know, it's just a difference of opinions, a disagreement. And then the next day, you know, you go about your business. You're living with these people 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right? The people you live with, the people that govern you, in other words, you know what I'm saying? So it's, you know, there's been some cops that worked in the block that when they walked in, I had the hair on the back of my neck stood up. But they were few and far between. You know, for the most part, it's people that work in these prisons and the people that I've had the experience, I've had the encounters with. And as I got older and as I got more mature and as I got more secure in who I was, right? You know, because when I was a kid, I was just a wild dude. I was just like, you know, I wanted to put on a front for everybody. But as I got older, it was like, hey, what's up? You know what I'm saying? What's going on? What's happening? You know? And that was it, you know. And then, you know, from those fostering those relationships with some officers, and like I said before, like, you know, and everybody thinks that, you know, some people that talk to the cops, when people want to go give information to the cops, they never do it in front of God and everybody. Nobody's ever going to go do that to an officer. You know what I'm saying? Like in these low security, sometimes you might have a fight, and the guy would be like, he did it. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's just, but nobody's ever going to the cops and whispering in their ear. That's done. They got lines on the phone. They got drop notes. But, you know, the people that are probably the biggest cooperators have always been like, yeah, fuck them cops. I don't talk to cops. I wouldn't talk to cops. Nobody going to talk to them cops. But they always put on this front. Like, you know, I don't need to put on a front for nobody. I mean, I was just, you know, whatever. I lived there, man. I cleaned the floors. I buffed the floors. I waxed the floors. You know, I don't care. And then what I got from that was, especially at the very end and having a good rapport, it actually saved me from doing more time and everybody in my drug class from doing more time, because the officer that worked the block was cool with me and he was like, Bot, you know, tell these guys this guy's coming up, the drunk's coming up from the camp, or this guy's coming up from over here, or they're coming in and shaking down. And I would just walk around and be like, yo, listen, get your shit together, you know? And, you know, there was more decent people than there wasn't, you know? And, you know, the power dynamic from the offices, you're going to have people in all walks of life that suck sometimes. You know, I always talk about the cop Kegley in the visiting room in fucking Lee County Penitentiary. He was the worst. He got me in trouble for nothing. I reached over and touched my wife at the time's chin, and he said I grabbed her breast. Like, it was just, you know, even the lieutenant seen it and said it was bullshit and ripped the ticket up. but I couldn't get my visit back. So there are people like that. It does happen. But for the 90 percentile, I mean, decent people, just a day's work. And God bless them. They got the highest suicide rate, I think, in any professions. So they end up killing, a lot of guys end up killing themselves. I mean, crazy. Law enforcement, I don't know. It's just a phenomenon. But that's the power structure of course, I was in the federal prison system, not the state. I know a little bit about the state from what I told. I could be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. But that's the power structure of the offices inside the prison. And, for the most part, it was like a live and let live type thing. You had some guys that were tough. You just had to kind of deal with them. They come in and shake down. It's just what they do. And then there was some, and then what happens, the worst part, and I'll end on this note, is if you had a guy that was, I remember in Fort Dix, there was some officers that were like real tough, like, no, everybody was standing at attention. Then you had an officer that was good and be like, hey, I don't care what you do. I don't care. Just don't be in the TV room during count. And then during count, there'd be people in the TV room. So, just inmates end up ruining a good officer. You know what I'm saying? That wants to be a decent fellow. But, people take advantage of him. It's human nature, I guess. But that's the power structure in the Federal Bureau of Prisons for officers. If I missed anything, make a comment. Share this stuff with your friends. Get your friends to subscribe to the channel. And let me know what you want to hear about. This is it. We're just going to keep making a video every now and again of what's going on in federal prison. And maybe some things of what's going on in Colombia too. Stay tuned. Tune into Bean Shooter Podcast. Shooter's Gallery Podcast. We got a whole bunch of episodes coming out, me and Mike Lee. Tune into that as well. Check out Tarzan Travels, my boy Jay McAvoy. And crazy dude. Like this stuff. Subscribe, send it to your friends. And we'll see.